Dr. Leslie Newbigin observed, in the great areas of Asia, Africa, and Oceania, the church grows steadily and even spectacularly. But in the areas dominated by modern Western culture, whether it is the capitalist or socialistic political expressions, the church is shrinking and the gospel falls on deaf ears. Our own observations confirm Newbigin's statement. There is a great hunger for Bibles and Bible literature in Eastern Europe and Russia. We know that because we've been involved with Eastern European Mission. However, there is little interest in Western Europe. In fact, we don't find much interest in the gospel in our own town or neighborhood. Our nation has heard about Jesus before. Churches, television, radio, and the internet proclaim some form of the Christian message. Our culture seems to be resistant to the gospel. The solution for some has been to repackage the gospel. To some extent, this is biblical. Paul spoke in a different way in Athens than he had to Jewish audiences. However, he always proclaimed the gospel. He changed the method, but not the message. James Hunter in American Evangelism has noted that much of the current evangelical literature accommodates the Christian message to the prevailing taste of the time. As a result, we have book titles like these: God's Psychiatry, God's Key to Health and Happiness, The Art of Understanding Yourself, and Do I Have to Be Me? Objectionable features of Christianity are minimized or ignored because this would interfere with marketing the product. James Thompson observes, a contemporary approach to evangelism and church growth is to offer a Christianity which maximizes the benefits of Christianity to the consumer. In 1 Peter, this is not the approach to proclaiming the gospel. The joy of the Christian faith is associated with having a message that makes one a stranger or exile in his own land. Rather than seeking a self-indulgent personal happiness, Peter encourages his readers to find joy in sharing in the sufferings of Christ. How did the first century church evangelize and grow in a hostile climate? We find some answers to that in our text this evening, 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. In our text, we first find that Christians, the church, has a message to declare. Notice in verse 9, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the good news that in Jesus we can have forgiveness of our sins. Already in this letter, Peter's had some things to say to his readers about reminding them about how they were born anew or born again. How that they were called out of a pagan situation, a hopeless situation, into a condition of salvation. They are to declare that message in spite of persecution and hostility. The early Christians proclaimed the good news of Christ. Non-Christians attended worship assemblies and heard the gospel. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 23, Paul is conscious of the impact of the Christian assembly on outsiders. In Corinth, in the churches, the worship assemblies have become rather chaotic. Everybody was wanting to show off their spiritual gift. And Paul gives some rules to make the assembly more orderly. And one reason is, what if an outsider comes in and hears some of this stuff going on and they don't have a clue what's going on? He says if they can hear prophecy, that is, if they can hear the message, they can understand. Well, no doubt, more than likely, some of Peter's readers had first heard the gospel in a worship assembly. Christians had gathered to worship, some outsiders had come in. Well, today there are non-Christians who will accept an invitation from a Christian friend or family member to attend a worship assembly or other church activity. The sad fact is that many have never received such an invitation. Now, it is true, we invite folks to come and worship with us, and we get a whole lot of no answers. I remember reading of one who had been invited to come and visit worship for time after time after time, and always made an excuse or said no. But they finally figured out if the person cared enough about them to keep inviting them despite all the rejection, they were going to go and see what it was all about, and they heard the gospel. You know, the gospel was also declared not only in assemblies, but it was also declared by individual Christians who took the message to the neighborhood and the workplace. Celsus, an ancient pagan writer, complained that Christians aggressively proclaimed their faith in homes and at the workplace. Despite the possibility and reality of receiving a hostile response, early Christians shared the gospel with non-Christian family, friends, and co-workers. Today, Christians too often talk with acquaintances about every subject except the one that has eternal consequences. Now, to share the gospel, of course, we must know it, and Peter's going to address that as he goes on in this letter, that we have to be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within us. It is important that the gospel be declared in a public setting, in a private setting, wherever the opportunity presents itself. Peter is encouraging that in this letter. Peter also says that Christians have a life to live. Verse 12, live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of wrongdoing, you may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Peter, in this letter, instructs his readers to live differently than the world. In the first century world, there was all kinds of immorality. Immorality was even a part of much of the religion of the day. Part of worshiping an idol was to engage in immorality. There was all kinds of immorality going on, somewhat reminiscent of what we see around us today. Christians were called to live differently than that. They are to live a life, Peter says, that will silence their critics. They've been criticized. They've been persecuted. They are different from those around them. I remember at least hearing once, perhaps more than once, of an individual who was converted to Christianity. Before they were a Christian, they spent a lot of time drinking with buddies. When they became Christian, they quit that. And all of a sudden, their good friends were not their good friends anymore. In fact, they were even hostile toward them because they had changed their way of life. Well, Peter's readers are experiencing hostility because of the change in their lifestyle. And here, Peter says, you need to live such good lives that it really puts people to silence. He will say, if you suffer, make sure you suffer as a Christian. What is expressed here is going to be expanded in the verses that follow. Peter's going to get specific about some different situations in life and how the Christian can demonstrate his faith. The evangelistic impact of Christian lives is one of the threads which runs through 1 Peter. At times, the pagan critics are silenced, not by Christian arguments, but by Christian lives. No one could argue against the power of Christian lives. A significant evangelistic strategy of 1 Peter included the power of dedicated lives to win over those who first scorned the strangeness of the alien lifestyle. Christ had made a difference in the lives of Christians, and their neighbors could see it. Christianity, with its high moral demands, offered a clear alternative to the decadent pagan society. Many chose the stern discipline of Christianity over the paganism which demanded nothing. We must remember that Christian conduct is noticed by others. Sadly, in times past, and often today, Christians do not live the Christian way of life. When people look at them, they see no difference from themselves. James Thompson says, "The Christianity which grows by careful market analysis and by careful attention to what the consumers are buying will lose its identity. Under these conditions, it may grow when it has nothing left to say." I think we see in, especially some of the television preachers, but in other venues as well, those who have basically taken all the power out of the gospel. They have big crowds, big television audiences. They are saying what people want to hear, but it is not a message that can bring salvation, not a message that can change lives. The church must not shape the message to the culture. The gospel has the power to change the culture. Christians must live the gospel. Outsiders will notice. Some will be attracted to this alternative lifestyle. A missionary in India went from village to village, entertaining the people with films and magic tricks before speaking to them about Jesus. On one of these occasions, an elderly Hindu man stood up and said, "Dear Pastor, we have listened with interest, yes, with respect, to your words about Jesus Christ. We love Christ and honor him as a unique man and as God. We also like to read the Bible when we have the time and are not too tired. But pardon me for saying this. This does not make us want to become Christians. Don't we know your parishioners? Don't we know how they live? How much hostility and enmity, how much drunkenness and deceit there is among them? They live no better than we do." It has been said that some folks are not Christians because they don't know a Christian, and others are not Christians because they do know a Christian. If they know a Christian who's not living the Christian life, it isn't a shining light. It is spreading the darkness. So Peter emphasizes two ways to evangelize, even when we're exiles. He tells us how to share the gospel.